Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. As of this month, I have now been on this planet for more than 30 years, and I still don't know everything about the world, and I probably will never know everything about the world because I will be learning till the very day I die. But one thing I realize is there were many choices I made in my youth which were suboptimal. Now, you might call these regrets, but for the most part, yes, I would change them if I could go back in time, but I don't have the opportunity to go back in time. So I'm grateful for the path that I've taken because it's allowed me to learn the lessons that I now have. But in this episode, I would like to pass on what I've learned so far down to the former 20-year-old version of myself, and in doing so, to those of you who may be listening to this as well. So I'm going to be giving advice to the younger version of me, to the 20-year-old version of me, from the 30-year-old version of me, in a number of domains. So the first area that I'd like to talk about is your health. And health is something that when you're younger, you can take for granted, especially if you've been fortunate enough to have good health. And I know that's not the case for all young people. Some people do, unfortunately, go through a lot of struggle and a lot of challenges regarding their health when they are younger. But when I look back to who I was when I was 20, I took so many things for granted. I was drinking a lot, I didn't exercise enough, and I ate absolutely horrible food. And there are photos that I look back at in the last decade where I could see myself just being, having way too much weight and not looking comfortable in the very clothes I was wearing. I was just uncomfortable with my body. And there was a period, maybe when I was 24, 25, 26, where I was incredibly self-conscious about who I was. And a big part of that came down to the fact that I had neglected my health for a number of years, and all of that started to catch up with me. So when you're 20, it's very easy to get away with making poor choices. And because you haven't been on the planet for that long, it may seem like these choices are fine because you can go and drink and wake up without a hangover. You're young enough to get away with it. But eventually these things accumulate and it takes a toll on your body. So looking after your health is such an important thing. And even if we think about how people gain status, at least the way I've grown up, when you were in high school, so when you were below 18, one thing I noticed is status went to the cool kids, and the cool kids were the kids who were like, if you drank, if you smoked, if you were kind of like that bad boy or bad girl, then you got your cool points because you were doing things that were based as that were adult things, right? If you were drinking early, you got cool points because you were doing things that somebody under 18, at least in Australia, where this is our legal drinking and smoking age, you were doing things that you shouldn't have been doing. So that made you cool. That gave you status. It also is not great for your health. And then after that, when you were 18 and above, I think status more came from how smart you were and maybe how much money you were making. So one example I can give is people who did cadetships, which is when a company kind of pays you to work for them and you go to university or your trade school or whatever, an apprenticeship. People who are making money at a young age, especially between the kind of 18 to 21, 22 demographic, if you were making something like $30,000 or $40,000, which isn't a lot of money in the grand scheme of things in terms of what people make in a country like Australia, but people who are making this amount of money at that age demographic were invariably the highest income earners of that demographic. So they got a lot of status and they probably felt very cool about themselves because they had access to resources that other people didn't. They were able to do the fancier things, which might have been harder for somebody who only had a part-time job at McDonald's or was tutoring. And so status at different ages came from different things. So when you were younger, it was from, were you doing adult things? But as soon as you got to 18, all of a sudden everyone can drink and smoke, so that stops being less of a cool thing. And between 18 and 21, it was, how much money are you making? And then that also, again, once everyone goes into their graduate jobs and starts working and finishes university, then everyone's making money. So the fact that you were making money a bit earlier stops being a cool thing and it stops being relevant. What I'm noticing now is that, in your youth, were you cool because you were doing illegal things? Were you cool because you were making money? Were you cool simply because you were smarter than everybody else? So there are people who are able to get into very high paid professions or difficult professions, or they were just known to be very smart people. But now that I'm 30, there's kind of a different status metric. It's who are the healthiest people. And and I realized this because I've spoken to a lot of people who have had many successes either in a traditional career or in running your own business. And all of these people, one thing that I find is very common is that people will have these tremendous successes in business and career. And if they haven't looked after their health, that's a huge regret. So the status symbol coming up to your 30s, and I think this is a status symbol that will actually continue for the rest of your life. It's probably like the one constant is, how healthy are you as an individual? Because there are so many people in trying to achieve these worldly things like job titles and prestige and money, they have sacrificed their health. And if I look back at who I was in the last 10 years, there have been times where I have been deeply dissatisfied by who I was physically because I wasn't doing exercise. I was holding on to too much weight. There are photos that I look back in the last 10 years where I'm horrified. So I'm not a very tall person. So if I get to like 78 kilos, I've been up there. It's just really bad. Your energy levels are low, you feel sluggish, and you look horrible, and you feel horrible about yourself. So now that I'm in my 30s, I realize the big status signal is, are you healthy? Are you fit? And that's something that I realize is going to continue for life, because a lot of people who have sacrificed their health to achieve things are now struggling to get back on the bandwagon of being healthy. And we live in a world where there are all these shortcuts. There are pills, there are injections you can take, Ozempic, whatever. But the new status signal is, can you go for a 30-minute run? And 10 years ago, that would have not been a feat. That would have been very common. But when you get to your 30s, when you have more responsibilities, more on your plate, the ability to stay fit, be fit, and be active is a huge status signaler. So I would say that screw the status signal, do it for your own health. I think you're going to have a very long life ahead of you. And if you can instill the habit of looking after your health when you're 20, that's not to say don't go and enjoy the things like the occasional drink and whatnot, but learn how to look after your body and make that something that you are going to continue to do. Because you can still achieve all these other successes, but if you lose your health, that is like building a house without a foundation. You are not going to be able to manage anything else. So looking after your health is probably the number one thing that I'm going to put out there to my 20-year-old self, because it's something that I didn't do very well, and it led to so many problems. The second piece of advice that I'd like to give to my 20-year-old self is mindfulness and learning how to manage your anger. So give yourself the tool of becoming mindful. And this is something that I'm working on every day, but I'm considerably more mindful now at 30 years old than I was in the past. And like I said, number one is look after your health, and I'm specifically talking about physical health. And number two is look after your mental health. So create a platform where you can develop mindfulness. So I always tell people that I wish I learned how to meditate and did a Vipassana meditation retreat at 20 years old. I only found out about Vipassana when I was 25, when I was depressed, and I was only able to do it for the first time after applying when I was about 26 years old. So if I had had that skill set half a decade earlier, when I was 20, it would have been an absolute game changer. In fact, I remember when I was living in Malaysia, I met these two girls from Germany, and they had both done a Vipassana meditation retreat, and they were 19 years old. And I remember we all caught a taxi together. We were in one of those rideshare situations, and we were just chatting along the way, and we all discovered that we'd all done Vipassana. And mind you, I'm more than a decade older than them, so I was 29 at the point. And I remember telling them, I'm so happy for you guys. I felt so much happiness for them that they had discovered the skill set of becoming mindful, of becoming a meditator at 19 and 20 years old, because it's just such a valuable tool to have in your minds, in your toolkit. It's such a valuable tool to have the ability to meditate, to focus on your body, to be aware of your sensations, and to respond to the world rather than react. And a lot of the mental health issues that I had in my 20s came to the fact that I was reacting to the world around me. I was not responding to the stimulus I was getting, and I was torturing myself. If somebody said something negative to me, I would let this fester in my mind. I would let it grow like a weed. I would let it manifest. A single seed of negativity in my mind would grow into an entire forest, and I definitely went through a lot of mental health struggles. And I think this is incredibly important for young men as well. I think we live in a world where young men especially are very long-housed. So society will tell you that you're toxic, that masculinity is toxic, and that it is getting increasingly harder to have outlets for your negativity. And for men, we're not really taught to express our emotions. And so if you can develop an outlet for your anger, and if one of those is meditation, so if you can learn how to control your anger in a way that is non-offensive to the rest of the world, and really you shouldn't care about offending the world, but I'm saying this is a really good way, learning how to meditate, learning how to give yourself a healthy outlet for your anger. Because anger itself is it's a natural emotion, you can have it, but the fact that it causes your blood pressure to rise, the fact that it causes your heart rate to increase, if you're always angry, this is also going to negatively impact your physical health. People who are always angry, you will look at them like people, if you meet people like at parties and they're always angry and they're always complaining, they're probably also going to be physically unhealthy. Maybe not visibly, but you'll see signs of people being very unhealthy individuals. So there is a place for anger because it is natural. There are times where you're going to have to fight for yourself, fight for your rights, fight for the people you care about. But if you can include something like meditation as a tool to control your anger, to control your sadness, to process your emotions, to learn more about yourself, to learn about your body, to learn about what you're feeling, that is an incredibly important tool that I think I wish I had as a 20-year-old. But I think if you are a 20-year-old, go out there and learn how to meditate. Give yourself a healthy outlet for your anger. I know for some people it's not meditation. For some people it's like going to a boxing class or doing some form of martial art, which I also think is really important. But learn how to be mindful and give yourself a healthy outlet for your anger. So that's number 2. The third thing I think is to learn about investing. And when I say learn about investing, I think there are ways to overkill this. If you are not a finance professional, I'm not telling you to go become a finance professional, but you should learn enough about the financial markets and the kind of capitalistic world we live in that you are able to navigate that and you are able to invest your money. So I only started investing much later in my 20s. I bought my first ETFs and shares at about 25 years old. So when I got my first graduate job after university, and it was a very, very important decision and step that I took at that time to actually start funneling majority of my earnings into ETFs. And there's a lot people say about this. I think there's arguments for and against, I think, investing when you're young. The beauty of investing when you're young is there's more time for that to compound. But the downside to that is you could be using that money to invest in your skills, and your skills are going to make you a more valuable person. So I think it's a balance of both. And let me tell you why I say that as a 20-year-old, you should learn about how to invest. And when I say investing, passive investing. Because for most of you, you're not going to be finance professionals. I am not a finance professional. But when I was 25 years old, I read a resource called Passive Investing Australia. And it is Australian focused, but it is relevant to, I think, many markets around the world because there's a lot of similarities. But it was a resource that taught me about how to analyze risk at a high level, how to think about opportunity cost, thinking about long-term trends in equities markets, why I would want to own a basket of shares rather than individual shares. So why would I want to have a diversified ETF? And it went through many of the kind of fundamentals that I needed to know in a basic enough way. It wasn't like reading this whole book where I'd be feeling confused after. It still did require me to go through and read it, but I was able to read this and I was able to start investing. And because I put a lot of money away in shares, I mean, sometimes I was excessive about this. I remember one time, as soon as I'd get my paycheck, I'd put that money into shares, and one day I only had like $3 or $4 in my actual checking account, and I needed to pump petrol, and my car was so low on petrol. I got to the petrol station and I pumped like $1 or $2, like just enough to get me home. And I remember the guy at the petrol station was like giving me these really weird looks, like, why on earth did you pump $1 to $2 of petrol. And it wasn't because I was broke. It was just because I put all my money in shares. So I always made the joke that, oh, I love shopping. As soon as I get my paycheck, I love shopping. But what I meant when I said I love shopping is I love shopping for ETFs. And me personally, I always bought the S&P 500. I bought something called the FTSE 100. And I had a few individual holdings, but majority of my money went into and is currently still in these big diversified ETFs where I own the top 500 companies on the S&P index. I own the top 100 companies in the FTSE index, and I just have these nice products, which are averages of them. They are domiciled in Australia, so it's easy for me to deal with my taxes. I don't need to file forms with the US government, with the IRS, saying that I personally own US shares. So this was something that was very helpful for me, and I think the big reason that I wish I started investing earlier is, well, I would have captured more of the growth in the markets. And of course, with investing, you have to realize there will be dips. All the money I have now invested, I've already mentally earmarked this as having a 50% discount sometime in the next 1 to 5 years, because I know there will be a market crash. These are things that happen. And this podcast isn't investment advice, but it's simply what I've done. And I would recommend you go and read a resource like Passive Investing Australia. I'll put the link in the show notes so you can access it. I think even if you're not from Australia, go and read something like this, because it will teach you a lot of, I think, basic principles, and you could ignore the Australia specific stuff. And then what you can do is you can find resources for your own country and jurisdiction so you can do some passive investing yourself. Because it's one thing to save money and have that money being eaten away by inflation, but when you're investing, you have a better chance of keeping up with inflation and growing your money over time. It is not going to make you rich. I always tell people that, like, investing, the way I see it, it is a way to preserve my wealth in the long term. In the short term, we might have a market crash. In the long term, I'm simply preserving my wealth in a way that's better than saving. Because if the market goes down, then yes, everything goes down, but I still maintain the same units of the company as I owned. So when they recover, those units will go up. Whereas I can't say the same for my savings account. If I pull money out of my savings account, then that money is gone, right? It's not magically going to go up just because the economy improved. It might actually go down. If the economy is doing so great and interest rates are low, then maybe that's not going to be the case, right? If the government wants more growth and more expansion, then I'm going to get a lower return on my savings, and we're probably going to have higher inflation because there's more demand in the economy. So that's me going on a bit of a tangent, maybe into too much detail on investing, but go and learn how to invest. And because I did invest starting from 25, now it's given me options. Like the fact that I put money away and I was able to build this kind of safety net in different layers, different kind of tranches, more high risk investments in the ETFs, savings, emergency funds and whatnot. It enabled me to leave my job, even just for a short period of time. And that has also allowed me to grow in my 30s. And so I would recommend investing in your 20s, even if you've got a part-time job. Start putting away 10 to 20% of what you're making and buying some ETFs, which are exchange traded funds, when you get a chance, because it might not seem like a lot when you first start doing it. But I think the important thing is you build the habit of investing when money comes in. It's learning how to look after the future you. At the same time, you don't need to take it to extremes. Keep some money, keep another 10 to 20% to invest into courses, to learn skills you'd like to. Which brings me to my next point. You want to be learning as much as you can, and don't take it for granted. And if I look at my university and high school experience, I took so many things for granted. And a lot of the reasons I was able to do things and do well is because somebody artificially placed deadline for me, which if you're in school, if you're in university, if you're in some sort of technical college, you'll have assignments, you'll have tests, you'll have projects, and those will have deadlines which are enforced on you. And it's because those deadlines existed, I would cram at the last minute to get these things done. And I feel like I took so many learning opportunities for granted. I also took opportunities for granted when it came to learning, because there were opportunities that were in the environments that I was part of, but were not compulsory. So if I look at my 20s, I know a lot of friends went to like startup events and networking events, and they were learning from new people, meeting new people, trying out new ideas, and they were failing and getting so much information that would help them later on. And for me, I really only did what was compulsory. When I wasn't doing my mandatory learnings, I was out drinking and partying, which isn't a bad thing, but it's all about having a balance. And I really wasn't, I took a lot of my learning for granted. And this, just like investing, also started to change when I was 25, 26 years old, because I put myself through every single certificate and course that I found interesting, be it technical things. I remember I put myself through a diploma of database design and development, which helped me break into the data engineering field. And later on, I was able to learn in that position to go and become a software engineer. And when I left that, I'm still a software engineer, but then I learned even more, and I'm still learning on how to create my own products, and I'm learning how to sell and market, and I've done courses in sales, and I spent a lot of money in the last 5 years on training myself. I'd go to public speaking classes, like I said, sales training classes, and I would go to all these different workshops. Like if somebody was offering a workshop on a topic that interested me, I'd go and do it. I even did 3 days of contract law training as a software engineer, because I realized, well, I work in this legal technology company. I'm exposed to contracts everywhere I go in my life, because I'm either signing a contract for my new phone plan, when I'm buying a property, I'm signing a contract there. When I get a new job, I'm signing a contract. If I give somebody a job, I'm creating a contract for them to sign. And so for me, I was like, okay, go learn about contract law. Like in 3 days, how much can you learn about contract law? Because for me, it's like, if I can get a high level understanding of a topic, that makes me very valuable. And this is one of the big pieces of advice I give. You don't need to be an expert, but if you educate yourself from 0% to 1% of a topic, which is generally what you can learn in like 10 to 20 hours, if you just take yourself to that like beginner level, then yes, you're not going to be an expert, but it's going to help you identify people who are trying to pull your leg, maybe people who are trying to misdirect you or misguide you. And you can direct your attention to people who are knowledgeable, because you know just enough about what they do to be able to have a proper conversation and discussion with them. So learn as much as you can. Don't take your learning for granted. Go and invest time, money, energy in learning. It doesn't have to be paid. There are so many things you can learn for free, but take it seriously, including the compulsory stuff. So if I think back to university, I could have definitely done a much better job of actually taking the subjects that I was exposed to much, much seriously, and I would have had a better outcome. I could have also joined clubs and societies which had all these learning events and workshops and talks, but I didn't do that at the time, and it's something that I'm doing now. And if I did it at 20, I would have been incredibly powerful. But I'm grateful that I've learned the lesson, so go out there and learn what you can. So far, just to recap, because I'm going to be talking more, my advice so far is look after your health, learn how to be mindful, right? Create a positive outlet for your anger, learn how to invest, which is number 3, and 4 is learn. Take learning seriously, because it is something that is going to compound, just like putting money in the bank, investing money. Any knowledge you gain is going to compound over your lifetime. And I can already say that's true, because even those things that I half learned when I was in university, I'm still using now. And I'm only getting better at these skills. And what I do now is I learn so intentionally, because I know that I'm doing it for a very good reason. And when I learn something new, I like to give myself a reason why I'm learning this. So it gives me the motivation to go and get to the competency that I need to get to. So to recap, 1, focus on your health. 2, become mindful, create an outlet for your anger, a positive outlet for your anger. 3, learn how to invest. And 4, take learning seriously. Do not take it for granted. So the 5th thing that I want to put out there is, as a person who is 20 years old, as a young person, your time now is incredibly valuable. One of the great books that I read this year was Die with Zero. And it states that one of the things that we overweight when we're young is the availability of this period in our life. There are things that you can do when you're 20 which are going to be harder to do, or you're going to have to do in different ways when you're older. So when I was 20, I was very lucky that, I did my first travel and trips and I stayed in hostels, and that was fun. But now as a 30-year-old, if somebody asks me to stay in a hostel, it's not going to be a very pleasant experience. I value my sleep now. There are things I enjoy more, and staying in a hostel just seems like a very bad value proposition as a 30-year-old. But when I was 20 years old and 21 years old, I remember I took this trip to Canada and I got to stay in a few hostels. They were great experiences because I got to hang out with people, I got to meet people, I was with a bunch of young people who were exploring the world, and it was such a positive thing. And experiences like this are going to change. Now, that's not to say that I can't stay in a hostel as a 30-year-old. And many of the people I met in hostels were actually older. I met some 50 and 60-year-olds. I met a lot of older people in hostels. But the experience is very different for them than had they been 20 years old. So it's not that you can't do things later on in life. It's just that the way you do them is going to be different. So when you're young, there are things that you are going to be able to do that are going to get progressively difficult. It is much easier to run a marathon when you're 20 than when you're 80. Now, there is still going to be an 80-year-old marathon runner, and maybe they only started running marathons at 70. But the fact of the matter is that you, as a 20-year-old, are more capable of doing that. So look for the opportunities which are going to be limited by your health span or limited by the changes in your responsibilities, and go and do those things. And it doesn't have to involve money, right? Like, there are things that you can do which are purely based on being young. Like, you could travel domestically. It doesn't need to be expensive. But there are things you should do now because the way that you're going to do them later is going to change. I know that the way I'm traveling now as a 30-year-old and somebody who's single, and mind you, I didn't expect to be single at 30 years old, but that's just the way things have worked out. But when I do have a family and when I have children, the way I travel is going to be very different. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's going to be different. Traveling with my future wife and with my children is going to be a different experience. Not a bad experience, but a different. And as a 20-year-old, this is going to be your window to do things, many things, that are just going to be more possible. And I think when you're young, people are more open to making friends. So maybe you should be at all those university or college networking events, talking to people, having the energy, trying to start up a club or a business or volunteering. Do things when you have the energy now to do them, when you have less responsibility, because you can still do them later in life, but you're going to be doing them in a different capacity. So take advantage of the fact that you are at a point of time where you have many things going for you. I think the other thing you have going for you when you're in your 20s is people look at you like a ball of potential. People look at you like a ball of potential. And you're also at the phase of life where, yeah, people look at you and it's okay that you don't have all the skills. So go do things now. Like now, if I wanted to take an internship at 30 years old, people, even if it was still an internship, people would have a very different expectation of me as a 30-year-old than they would of you as a 20-year-old. As a 20-year-old, people are just going to be much happier for you to make mistakes. As a 30-year-old, the equation has now shifted to, okay, great, you should be realizing your potential yourself. It's not my job to help you as much. What can you do for me? What value can you provide? So take advantages of the opportunities that you have now. Make the most of being young. And I'm not telling you to go and be degenerate, but there are so many things that you can do now that are time-bound. I recommend you go read Die with Zero. It's a great book. You know what? I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well, because it is a great book to read, I think, when you're young. And it is a book that's tailored to very high net worth individuals, but it does bring some important concepts about the fact that there are things which are better suited to when you're younger. Like I said, like staying in hostels, which is relatively speaking, a very cheap way to travel, and, you know, taking buses rather than taking a plane or a train. Like taking those modes, which are very cheap, is going to be a much better option when you're younger. And you're going to be more able to handle it when you're younger than when you're 40 or 50 years old. Like even now, staying in a hostel is very unpalatable. I reckon that's only going to get harder when I'm 40. You know, if I've got a wife and 2 or 3 kids, that's going to be a very challenging proposition to go stay in a hostel. So it's, when you're young, take advantage of these opportunities. One thing that I'm happy of, that when I was 21, I did do my big my big trip across Canada. I went across Canada. I started in Vancouver and I took the Canadian. So I slept on a train for like 5 days because, you know, you had to sleep on the train. It was like a day and a half between each city. And that's a really uncomfortable thing to do. I wasn't in a sleeper carriage. I was literally in this upright seat, going across Canada, getting off every 1 to 2 days, exploring a city for 3 days, hopping back on. And staying in conditions like that would be very untenable now. Like now, if I had to take the Canadian from Vancouver to Toronto, I would be paying for one of those sleeper carriages. But that is something that I can do now that I'm older, that I have more resources and means. But when you're younger, you don't need those comforts. You can go and do those tough things. So go out and do them. Make the most of doing the things which make sense to do now when you are in your 20s. So the next thing that I want to talk about is building a reputation. Now that I'm 30 and I kind of look at my colleagues and friends, One of the most valuable things that you can have is building a good reputation. And I didn't always have a good reputation because, like I said, when I was younger, I did a lot of drinking, a lot of partying. Yeah, people might have thought of me as smart, maybe, or smart-ish with quotation marks, but I always had this reputation for being one of the wild ones. And I stopped drinking for 5 years, almost 5 years. I've recently resumed a bit, and it took a long time. It probably took 5 years to recover that reputation, to create a new image of somebody who was very focused on their work and focused on their learning and development and was still able to have a good time without alcohol. It took me a long time to change that reputation. But one of the important things I've realized is when you're in your 20s and you get these opportunities, you get a new internship, you get the opportunity to work for a company, is to work as hard as you can. Don't be the person who's always looking for a shortcut, who's looking how to take advantage of the situation, who's looking how to get the most out of a particular situation. When you're young, work hard. The reward is not always going to be immediate, but I remember every internship I had, and pretty much almost every summer, I was working. When I was tutoring during the university semesters, and maybe by my second and third year, I was getting professional internships. And when I got those internships, I worked as hard as I could. Even if I wasn't the best person, I wasn't the most knowledgeable, I made sure I put the work in and I got it done. I was really proud of it. I was happy for the opportunities to learn. And because I did that, I think I created the reputation of somebody who does great work. And when I left the government, I had people calling me back saying, would you like to join our team? We have this role XYZ available. And it was because I applied myself. And that definitely happened more after 25 than before 25. But I created a reputation that Hassie is somebody who's going to come, and even if he doesn't know how to do it perfectly today, he's going to get it done for you. He's going to make sure you leave happy. He's going to get that work done. And now that I've left my job, people still bring opportunities my way. And because I'm still trying to create things, I'm taking on risk, and people look at me now and it's like, okay, this is somebody who's taking on risk. They're actually trying to provide value for free. I created a group of people who did this no sugar challenge, and I organized it, and for 1 month I basically dedicated some of my time, because I was back into Sydney, into improving other people's health. And be somebody who's known for giving value, working hard, and build that reputation, because more people are going to want to work with you, and that is such an important thing. The counterpoint to this is I also see people who've done the opposite. They've taken the shortcuts, and maybe they've gone up, maybe they've worked their way into certain positions, but they have a reputation of being somebody who you shouldn't work with, because they're going to be lazy, they're not going to work hard, they're going to look for shortcuts, they're going to look to take more value than they're providing. And these people might not have realized it in their 30s yet. It will become more apparent later. And I truly believe that. But because they're takers and they haven't built that reputation for working hard, for being the workhorse, for being somebody reliable, dependable, opportunities don't really come their way, and the good opportunities don't come their way. And this is something that is going to harm you in the future. The other aspect of working hard is you need to learn how to work hard. That is the other thing I see when I look at the people who are 30 years old. There are two camps of people: the people who have never pushed themselves and the people who have. And in my case, I have pushed myself to the point of burnout before. And now I know how to manage that better, kind of how to get to the 90% mark and then learn to pull back the reins so I don't get into full burnout. But there are some people who never push themselves that hard. And now, as soon as they get the slightest challenge, even on really, really simple tasks, they struggle, they get burnt out, they get stressed, because they haven't built the discipline of working hard and pushing themselves. So even all the way back in university, one of the good traits I had amongst the many bad and negative traits was that when we did have to cram for exams or assignments, I was the person who organized the study sessions. I would bring people along and be like, look, I'm going to be here. And of course, these people were helping me, because by them being around me, it also motivated me, but I was the person organizing these things. And so that's a super important skill to build, not just because it creates a reputation and that's going to bring opportunities your way, but because you are going to teach yourself how hard you can work, because this is valuable data that you can now use in the future. Because if you know how hard you can work now, then you can tailor that. You can avoid burnout. You can push yourself just up to the brink of where you're going to get burnt out, and you can recover, and you can come back and you can repeat that process so you can achieve greater things. Because I see so many people now who are 30 years old who've taken every conceivable shortcut, who have made jokes of people they think who are working too hard, because for them that's like an almost anti-status symbol, like, oh, why are you working so hard? But they now lack the ability to work hard themselves. And it's a very, very hard thing to train. So I'm grateful that I've pushed myself to the point of burnout in the past. And of course, it's a very negative thing. I'm not recommending you to go get burnt out, but at the same time, go learn how to work hard. You're probably going to be doing this for somebody else, but it's a super valuable thing because you're going to learn a lot, you're going to build a reputation, and more importantly, you're going to teach yourself where you can push yourself to and where to stop. Because in the future, if you don't know where to stop and you're like 30, 40 years old, it might be much harder to recover from burnout then than it is now. So in your 20s, do the work. And I've done this so many times, both in jobs, when I was overloading, so I took on more credit units in a semester than I could. And I remember I got so sick. My friends will probably remember I was in a hotel room with the bloody flu, and I had to book hotel rooms near university because I lived very far away towards the end because I was doing so many hours that I just needed to get back to my hotel room to sleep like 5 or 6 hours so I could repeat the process the next day. And I'm glad that I pushed myself in those situations because now hard work doesn't scare me. I know how to work hard and I know when to pull back. So you want to do that for 3 reasons: to build the reputation, to learn because you're going to learn by working hard, but you also want to learn about yourself. And this is for your own benefit. So you're going to learn from other people because you're working hard. You're going to build a reputation, which is going to bring you more opportunities in the future. And you're going to figure out your own point to stop. So get out there and work very hard. So let's recap the points of advice that I've talked about. Number 1 is look after your health. Number 2 is develop the skill of being mindful. Create a healthy outlet for your anger. The third one I spoke about is learning how to invest. Learn how to take care of your money. There are great resources for this. I'll put it in the show notes. Number 4 is take your learning seriously. Acquire the knowledge and don't take it for granted. You're going to get so many opportunities in your youth to learn, both formally and informally. Make sure you're taking them. Number 5 is take advantage of the time period you are in. When you're younger, you're going to be able to do things which are going to be harder or different in later stages of your life. So take advantage of the things which are time bound now. And the 6th thing that I spoke about is work hard, build a reputation, and find out your point of burnout because it's going to help you in the future. So continuing, there's 2 last things I want to talk about. The 7th point of advice is accountability and blame. And this is something I struggled with for a large part of my 20s, is that I did not take enough personal accountability. And if you're a young man listening to this, I think accountability is wonderful for everybody. But I think if you're a man, it is a non-negotiable because the world will not tolerate you not being accountable for your own actions. And when I say accountability, it means taking complete and utter ownership over everything you do. And when I was younger, when I was especially in the first half of my 20s, I blamed everybody else for everything. And I was so miserable. I blamed my parents. I blamed them for things that happened in my childhood, for things I was unhappy with, for health problems I was dealing with because I was neglecting it. And it's just a very bad attitude. It's a bad way to deal with things. And I can see this when people speak now. It's people who have lower agency. The blame is always somebody else's. And yes, other people can be responsible for things, but you always need to be asking yourself, what can I do in this situation? What is in my own circle of control? What I can control, I should control it. And what I influence, I should try to influence. But at the end of the day, that may or may not go to plan. And anything outside my circle of influence, I should not care about at all because I can't control this. So learn how to be accountable and try to create the mentality. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to take you a lot of time because when these things are ingrained in your mind, for me, it took like years of therapy and learning how to meditate in my mid-20s to kind of let go of the blame and hatred and lack of accountability that I had. It took me a long time to let go of that. So it's not an easy thing to let go of. But now that I've done it, I have better relationships. And I know with some people, some of the relationships in my life, especially with my family and my parents, changed because I took so much accountability. It scared people. Because once you stop blaming people for your problems, you stop giving them power over your problems and you take control of that yourself. And initially it was uncomfortable for many people in my life because I took this extreme level of accountability. But now it's led to much more positive relationships. because now I am responsible for everything in my life. And I also know this is a very male thing, but I'm also going to be responsible and accountable for the people that I have to look after, which is going to be my future wife and my future children. And so being accountable is a super important thing. It is something that you need to master now at 20. Start doing it now, because if I had that mindset of accountability at 20 years old, personal relationships aside, I would have done amazing things for my health, for my career, for my ability to create businesses, to create value for people. I would have done a much better job of this had I had that mindset of complete accountability at 20 years old. And even with people who I see are very successful and who have had success in their lives, some of them still lack accountability, and you can kind of see that it's actually holding them back. So people far more successful than me, I meet CEOs, and the fact that they're blaming everybody else for their problems and not taking the steps that they can themselves, you can kind of see why their companies aren't growing, because they have that mindset, that victim mindset of needing to blame everybody else. And the victim mindset, I've spoken about this before, it's really ugly. It's really, really ugly on men. And so learn how to take full accountability. It's going to be uncomfortable, because there's going to come a time where you realize the only person you have to blame is yourself. But once you start doing that, and it's not about being harsh on yourself, but it's about encouraging yourself to reflect, to take responsibility for actions you have taken in a particular situation. It doesn't matter what anybody else has done, and then to use that to fine tune what you are going to do in the future. So learn how to take accountability. That's point number 7. And then my very final piece of advice to my 20-year-old self, and to any of those of you who are listening to this, is stop comparing yourself to everybody else. Because what happens for you is going to happen at a different time for somebody else. When, like I said, some of the examples I gave earlier in some of my points were the people who were smoking and drinking when they were in high school, when they were less than 18. And that seemed like a really cool thing. But once you got to 18 years old, and I don't recommend drinking and especially smoking as something that you develop into a habit, but when you get to 18 and everybody can do this, at least in Australia, it stops being a cool thing. And with making money, the people who are making money and being cadets and who are working, going to uni and spending a lot of hours working, now once everybody else started making money, great, that was less of an important thing. But the important thing is different things will happen to people at different stages. So, you might be looking at those people drinking when you're 16 years old and say, oh, look at them drinking. But no, you don't need to rush yourself. It's not a good thing for your body, first of all. But second of all, you're actually going to be able to do this legally in a few years. When you're 18, there's going to be people who are 18, 19 years old who might have that prestigious corporate cadetship, and they're making 30 or 40, $50,000 whilst being at university, whilst you're barely struggling to make $5,000 or $6,000 a year at your part-time job. But you know what? That's okay, because your time will eventually come. The rate of pace that happens for many different people, like it's going to be different. And for me, I realized this personally because I did this ridiculous double degree with a double major in my science degree. It was a Bachelor of Engineering, which is a 4-year degree. And I also did a science degree majoring in chemistry and pharmacology. And because I did these two things together, it took me 5.5 years, but I took 1 year off to go work full time at the Department of Defense in Australia. And because of that, from when I started university to when I finished university, it took 6.5 years. And I think one of the big contributing reasons that I also ended up very depressed in my mid-20s is because I'd spent a lot of time, especially when everybody else started leaving university and started working, whilst I was still grinding away at this really long degree, was that I was comparing myself to other people. And you now have less friends at university, people have left, they're making money, they're out in the world, they can do things that are more adult. And because it took me longer to get to that stage, and I was comparing myself to everybody else, I was really just putting myself in a negative mindset. Now the irony is, there's a lot of people who, like, after I graduated university, I ended up in the same position as many of these other people. There was points where I was making more money than other people who had been working longer. And so you realize all these things that you were worried about, you shouldn't be worrying about. It's wasted mental energy. You're wasting mental energy on being negative and comparing yourself to other people, because different things will happen for different people at different times. And now I have a very similar situation in the sense that I have a lot of friends and family who are getting married and kind of in those kind of late 20s to early 30s range. And for me, if we rewind 3 or 4 years ago, I was dating somebody and I thought, this is probably going to be it and I'm going to be married, and that didn't work out. But now I don't have that pressure on myself because I know that I will find the right person and I know what to look for because I've now got this database of knowledge. And I know that when my time comes, it will be different to somebody else's time, but it will come. And I'm not in a rush to get there. And so I know that I shouldn't be comparing myself to the people who are currently getting married, because if I try to push myself to their time scale, I'm going to make a bad decision. In the kind of very best case, I just make myself very unhappy by saying, oh, why am I not married? Why haven't I found the perfect partner for me yet? And that is going to be something that I think a lot of 20-year-olds deal with. And I see a lot of younger men in my life who maybe you've changed degrees, maybe you've made mistakes, and you're kind of in your early 20s and you're feeling behind everybody else. You shouldn't feel behind everybody else because, like I said, things will change very quickly. One person is going to start a business in their 20s and it's going to take off. For another person, they're going to start a business at 55 after 2 or 3 decades in the corporate world. So when things are going to happen for different people is going to be different. It's going to be different for you, but if you spend your time comparing yourself to other people and feeling sorry for yourself, then you are shooting your own potential in the foot. You're not actually taking actions to correct yourself. If you think you've taken the wrong steps in the past and you're sad because you feel behind everybody else, then you wallowing in your own pity is going to hold you back from actually getting to where it is you want to go. So you're better off just taking the slow steps, because it might take you until you're 26, 27 to finally get into the workforce. But once you get there, you're not going to be too different to everybody else. So spending all that time worrying and feeling sad for yourself and comparing yourself to everybody else is just really a lot of wasted mental energy. And I've spoken about status signals in this episode, and they are important for the way society functions, but you shouldn't care too much about them. Use them where they're useful to you, but don't take them too seriously at the same time. And so I think there's so much more advice that I could give to my 20-year-old self, but I've been talking for a very long time in this episode. And those are probably like the top 8 things that if I could go back in time and speak to the 20-year-old version of me, that's what I would tell them to do. So before I end this episode, I'm going to do a quick recap of what I've spoken about. And I've been doing recaps throughout this episode because there's a lot to talk about. But the 8 things are, number 1 is look after your health. Take care of your body. In your 20s, it's easy to take it for granted, but in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, being in good health is going to be an amazing thing for yourself, for your energy. It's going to help you look after everybody you need to look after, and it is going to be the best status signal. The second point of advice for my 20-year-old self is to learn how to be mindful, learn how to meditate, create a healthy outlet for anger and sadness that is actually going to improve your life rather than make it worse. And I think this is super important for young men, because young men are living in a very longhouse society where you're not allowed to express yourself and anger is construed as negative. So it could be meditation, it could be martial arts. Get out there and go and do it. Learn how to take control of your own body, learn how to be mindful and be aware of what it is that you are feeling. The third piece of advice for my 20-year-old self is to learn how to invest. It is great to save money, but learning how to manage your wealth and create something that is going to give you optionality in the future is super helpful. I wish I started doing this at 20, even when I was making less money, by simply putting away 10 to 20% of what I was earning, because it's not about how much you're investing, it's about building the discipline. You do not want to start learning how to manage money and learning how to preserve your wealth when you get your first big boy or big girl job. You want to start doing it when you're working part-time, because these good habits are just going to make that easier, and you're also going to benefit from being able to be in the market for a longer time and compound and maybe dealing with the market dip and still investing throughout that. You're going to learn how to deal with situations that make other people uncomfortable, and this is going to help you in the long run. So learn how to invest. That's point 3. Point 4 is learn how to learn. Take learning so seriously. You're going to get so many opportunities when you are younger to learn. Do not take that for granted. You are going to have opportunities in your formal learning, and this is a common one where people just don't take it seriously. You're rocking up to your classes late, you're cramming for your exams, your assignments, you're not taking it seriously. But these are really valuable things you're learning. They might seem a bit silly, but do them. You're also going to have a lot of informal opportunities to learn, and that might be something that's available at your technical college, at your university. It might be something that you can go volunteer for. Go and do it, because you want to spend, well, your whole life is going to be learning, but there is so much you can learn now that is just going to compound over your lifetime. So go and do that. I'm grateful for the things I've learned. I'm grateful that I spent so much money investing in courses like public speaking courses, going to sales training, doing contract law, reading all this technical literature, which helped me be a better software engineer and which helped me change careers. I took learning for granted in the first kind of 5 to 7 years from when I was 18 years old, and I only got serious about it later in life. But it is something that, yeah, you should absolutely be taking very seriously, because everything you learn now is going to make your life richer and more amazing. And I didn't talk about this when I spoke about learning, but I think learning a second language is going to be a very valuable skill. It's going to open up your doors, so go and learn things. Don't just learn things for commercial reasons, also learn them for fun. And like I said, a language is a perfect example of that. So that's point 4, take your learning seriously. Point 5 was, there are things that you can do at this phase of life that are very time bound. So be it staying in a hostel, be it traveling very cheap in a very uncomfortable way, there are so many things you can do now in your early 20s, that are going to be harder to do, you're going to be unable to do, or that are going to be very different during different decades in your life. I am no longer comfortable staying in a hostel. I value my sleep. I value my privacy. I don't travel as light as I used to in my 20s. There are many things I bring around. For example, I carry this microphone around. So for me, I value having my own hotel room so I can record these podcasts. When I was 20, that wasn't the case. I was young. I was freer. I was exploring new places. I was doing my big trip across Canada, and that was an amazing experience. So I recommend that read the book called Die with Zero. It will frame some of these concepts that there are certain experiences in your life which are better suited to being younger, and so you should absolutely do these things now. It's not about being a degenerate, it's about exploring, taking advantages of the opportunities that you have in your youth. It could be running a marathon. It's going to be easier for you to learn how to run a marathon now in your 20s, and it's arguably going to be better for your health if you start training and do this progressively than it is going to be when you're 80. Now, that's not to say that there aren't 80-year-old marathon runners who started when they were 70, but it's easier for you now in your 20s to run a marathon. So go ahead and do these things now. So that's point 5. Take advantage of the phase of life you're at and use your time wisely as a 20-year-old. So that's point 5. Now, point 6 was work hard. And you're going to work hard for 3 reasons. When you're working hard, you're typically going to be working hard for somebody else. So it's either going to be in university, it's going to be at an internship or a job you have in your 20s. And yes, you're going to be creating a lot of value for somebody else, but by working hard, you're going to be learning a lot of the skills. The second point to that is you're going to create a reputation for being somebody who gets things done. And that is going to create opportunities that come your way. And now that I've gotten to my 30s, I'm grateful that I've worked hard. Part of me also wishes I worked even harder, so I had more of those opportunities coming my way. But it's a really valuable thing to build that good reputation. And the third point of that is figuring out where your point of burnout is. Now, I don't recommend going and burning yourself out, but at the same time, you kind of need to push yourself to figure out where your limits are. Because I know so many people who haven't done that in the last decade, and now they're struggling. They can't do simple projects because they don't know what it takes to go through the pain and the suffering and to take something to completion. It's all talk, and they buckle under pressure. So for you, the goal should be, what's the point I get burnt out? And yes, there's going to be some recovery associated with that, but it's going to be easier in your 20s. And once you know the point at where you burn out, you can stop before that point. And you can make sure you're recovering effectively before you go through another cycle. And that's going to allow you to achieve more. And remember, your capacity to do things is going to improve, both in terms of intensity, and as your skill sets improve, you're going to be more capable of doing things. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where you're delegating, which for some people happens in their 20s, for some it's going to happen much later in your life. But you yourself want to learn how to work hard, you want to learn how to push yourself, and ultimately where to stop. So work hard, build a reputation, figure out your point of burnout is point 6. Point 7 is learn to take accountability for yourself. It's such an important thing. Being accountable is one of the most helpful things that I've done because it's given me back control of my life. It's enabled me to have better relationships with people because I'm not blaming people for things that they no longer have control over. I'm taking control for who I am in the present and what I will do in the future. So be accountable for everything you do, and don't give blame to other people. It's not a helpful thing. You are going to feel negative about doing it. Other people are going to feel hurt when you give them blame. Take responsibility for what you can. If it's in your circle of control, do it. If it's in your circle of influence, but be willing and open to the fact that just because you tried to influence somebody, it still might not happen. And if it's outside of your circle of influence, let it go. So take accountability as number 7. My eighth and final point is to stop comparing yourself to other people. Different people are going to achieve different milestones at different phases of their life. Now, I was talking earlier that there are right times to do certain things when we were talking about the topic of certain activities in your life being more suited to certain time frames. But at the same time, you shouldn't be comparing yourself to other people. So that's a very important thing. And I feel like a lot of young people put themselves through a lot of misery because they are busy comparing themselves to other people. And they're saying that, oh, I'm 18, but I'm only making 5,000 a year and my friend's got this cadetship at a company. I feel so behind. Or for people who've gone down the wrong track. And maybe you're only starting university at 22, 23, or you're starting a trade school, or you're starting a normal job much later in life and you feel behind everybody else. That's completely normal. And you're eventually going to get to the point where you're going to achieve the same thing that everybody else has achieved, and it's no longer going to be a big thing. And you're just going to realize that you've spent a lot of time being negative, and that's actually going to hamper your ability to execute on your potential. So those are the big 8 things that we talked about. Number 1, look after your health. Number 2, learn mindfulness. Number 3, learn to invest. Number 4, learn how to learn. Take your learning seriously. Number 5 is that there are periods of time to do things. Take advantage of what you can do now in your 20s, in your youth. Do not waste the opportunities available to you. Number 6 is work hard, build a reputation, figure out your point for burnout. Number 7 is take complete accountability for all of your actions and outcomes in life, because you are going to have a far better go of doing these things than if you don't. And finally, number 8, my final piece of advice to my 20-year-old self is don't compare yourself to other people, because you're just going to leave yourself and in a pit of misery, and it's not worth it. So with this, I end this very, very long episode here, and to all of you listening to this, I wish you great success in all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.